This is the Getting Started with Next.js Commerce template for Shopify. This is a workshop on how to set up a headless Shopify store and deploy that store to Vercel. Um, I will be leading today's workshop along with my esteemed colleague Thomas. My name is Christian. I'm based out of New York City, and I'm a senior sales engineer for Vercel.
Mhm. Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas. I'm also a sales engineer here at Vercel. I've been here for about 5 months. Before that, I was at Datadog, and I've always been a huge power user of Vercel and Next.js, which is partly why I came on board. And yeah, really looking forward to walking you guys through this template.
Awesome. Well, now that we're introduced, I'm going to go ahead and review our agenda for the day. We're going to start with an intro to Next.js, so we just understand what we're working with. We're going to cover choosing the right framework, maybe compare Next.js to some other options. We're going to give you a demo of the commerce template that we have deployed to Vercel. This is for headless Shopify stores. We're going to cover why you should go headless with Next, Vercel, and Shopify, and how it can benefit you. And then we're going to finish with a live Q&A. So if we don't have any objections there, I'm going to go ahead and get started. But before we dive into Next.js, I just want to get a quick pulse check of the audience and ask a poll. So what framework are you guys currently using to build e-commerce apps? Ooh, perfect timing. So we have a poll here, a couple questions, Next.js, Shopify Hydrogen, Salesforce, Squarespace, or anything else. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of time. Again, we need music here, a little bit of Jeopardy music.
Yeah, Next.js for life.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, nice. We love that energy.
Yeah, Nathaniel, you can stay. Well, I tried to vote, but it says I can't vote. So we're getting all the audience member responses here. So, all right. Seems like the majority of responses here are Next.js, which is great to see. We have a good amount of Next.js experience. Then we have Shopify Hydrogen experience, which is nice. Hopefully, you're going to learn a little bit more about Next.js today and how you can take your Shopify experience and apply the benefits of Next.js. Then a couple people doing other. If you want to drop the other answer into the chat here, I'm just kind of curious what you guys are using to build e-commerce stores. All right, so moving on, just want to cover a bit about Next.js.
Yeah, awesome. So, guessing a lot of you guys are familiar with Next.js, but for the folks that aren't, Next.js is really the go-to React framework for some of the largest retailers in the world, right? We help companies like Nike, Target, Ticketmaster, New Balance, and they're all building modern e-commerce experiences with Next.js. And it's really because Next.js offers a really comprehensive tool set for the demands of e-commerce, right? You need speed, you need scalability, but you also need highly personalized dynamic applications. And whether you're fully client side, fully server side, right, it's hard to get that balance and making sure that you have all the pieces together. And so Next.js is going to be a lot of the times the best tool for the job. And what really sets us apart is that rich ecosystem, right? We're going to walk through this throughout this presentation. There's many different ways to loop in Next.js, whether it's through different libraries, through different tools, right? Even with hosting or AI with V0 or Vercel. We want to make sure that you guys are building on a framework that's designed to scale, to perform, and adapt to the future of the web. Awesome. So quickly, we want to talk about some of the customers that we have seen using Next.js and Vercel. As you can see, Next.js has over 7.5 million NPM downloads per week, and it has one of the largest developer bases of more than 1.5 active users. So some of the world's largest e-commerce brands, right? They use Next.js, not for just their online stores, but also for their broader digital experiences as well. A lot of the times, right, if you're just starting off with an e-commerce experience, there's many different tools for that job. But if you wanted to expand that to maybe something with a lot of static content, some more dynamic portions of your application, and you wanted to kind of expand your digital footprint, you might be limited with some of the choices that are not Next.js, right? So Next.js is built to handle e-commerce, but it's going to give you guys flexibility to kind of grow in that sense. So it's actually one thing that we see a lot of our customers moving from, hydrogen and oxygen over to Next.js is they like the mature and scalable ecosystem that Next.js provides. And most importantly, right, we want to make sure that you guys can build quick. We want to make sure that you guys can iterate to greatness as quick as possible. And with a large developer base, whether you're working alone or with other teammates, we want to make sure that the community is there to support you guys as well. Awesome. So, we figured that there would be a good number of people using hydrogen today. So we wanted to directly kind of speak to what some of those differences might look like, as well as, what we see in the field as people using hydrogen moving over to Next.js, right? So listed here are some of the benefits and some of the differences here. Of course, right off the bat, it's not a popularity contest, but there is kind of a reason to that popularity. And I would say Next.js has one of the best when it comes to offering you kind of first-class primitives to access different rendering strategies out of the box. This is something that we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides as well. But whether you're building just like a server-side generated, highly cached e-commerce app, or you want to use more server-side rendering or client-side rendering, right? We want to make sure that your developers can seamlessly kind of transition through those. Next.js has famously coined the term framework-defined infrastructure. What really powers Next.js is also the ability to kind of stick that on with Vercel so that whatever you're creating with Next.js will be kind of super powered with Vercel. We have a lot of the functionality that you might look for within a full enterprise e-commerce application like middleware. We support server actions, of course, and server components. And we also have ISR, which is something that we'll talk about in just a bit, but gives you guys a lot of the benefits of server-side generation without having to cost or take as much resources in that sense. So let's talk a little bit about some of these rendering strategies. This is a common like 3-pillar combo that we see a lot of our customers in e-commerce using, and this is what allows them to have really, really fast yet dynamic experiences on the web. So what you guys are seeing here on the right is a little snippet from our website, partialprerendering.com. So PPR is something that Next.js has coined and is actively developing on, but you guys can also take part in it and try it out within our Next.js Canary versions today. And essentially what allows you to do is within that initial request, you can essentially send out static parts of your application, right? Like the images, the descriptions, right? And then stream in the dynamic parts. So it actually makes it a lot easier to go ahead and get this kind of architecture without having to, have a bunch of use effects in your app and, having to manage this client side. And on top of that, with ISR, we can effectively cache and update those static parts of your application. Combine that with prefetching, right, which is enabled by default with the link component in Next.js. And you can actually go ahead and prefetch those static components a little bit quicker, giving your users a really, really immediate feel, right? And we know that nowhere is page speed more important than the e-commerce industry. Amazon found that every 100 milliseconds of added load time translated to about 1% decrease in sales. So we know speed is important, and we want to make sure that you guys know that Next.js has the right tooling to make your apps fast.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Thomas. I want to take a brief step back before we talk about some of the more technical details. We talked a little bit about what Next.js is, but just for anyone who is very new to Next.js, I would like to just briefly cover the difference between React and Next.js. So if you were to build an app in React, that app would be only rendered on the client. And the reason it's necessary to use a framework like Next.js is because Next.js can offer server-side rendering. So that way, when um, bots, crawlers, like for example from Google, which index the web to create Google listings, they need to be able to have your website available on the server when the crawler hits it in order to index it and put it on Google's listings. So this is really, really important for search engine optimization. And with Next.js, you have a couple of different ways you could go about creating those files on the server for the web crawlers. And the first that we're going to cover is static site generation. So with older versions of Next.js, this was a page by page distinction, where on any given page, your site would be either statically rendered, server-side rendered, or client-side rendered. And we're going to get into the distinctions here and why they're important. But the first we're going to cover is static site generation. So what does that mean? Well, this means that the HTML, which is the language that gets sent to the client. So when someone visits your site, whether it's in Google Chrome or Safari, and they type in the address for your web store, the HTML is what gets sent from the server to their computer and builds the visual representation of their site. Um, and if your site is statically built, that means the HTML is already compiled and it's ready to go. So it's a very fast loading experience for your users. Um, and this is really best for content that doesn't change too frequently. What you might use this for on your store is maybe your homepage if it's not changing too frequently. Um, maybe your product pages if your prices aren't changing very frequently. Usually it's for content that doesn't change very often. And the reason for that is examples, maybe your terms and conditions pages, your privacy policy, things like this. But the reason for that is because the static pages are compiled at build time. So that means when you package your site to upload it to the server, that's when the static files get created. But the trade-off there, it sounds great, it's really fast, but the trade-off is that you have to rebuild your site really often to regenerate these static files. And you might not want to rebuild your entire website on a frequent basis if these change. So we have another option, which is server-side rendering. So the difference between static, which compiles at build time, and server-side rendering is that the server-side rendering HTML gets compiled at request time. So when a user visits your site, and they type in your url.com and press enter, and they send that request to your server first has to think about the content that it's going to deliver to this user. This is really, really common on applications or websites that are a lot more dynamic. Social media is one great example of this. X.com, the everything platform, or whatever it's called these days, is one fine example where that content has to be generated at request time because we don't know what tweets we're going to be showing a user. Facebook is very similar. Or maybe in an e-commerce example, maybe you have a product listing page that shows recent products and you're adding new products frequently. That might be a good example of a page that should be server-side rendered because it could update multiple times a day and you don't want to rebuild that. Um, so server-side rendering can take a little bit longer than static rendering because it first has to think about that. Um, but they are both static and server-side rendered pages are both really good for search engine optimization. Like we talked about before, because that HTML is compiled on the server, that means it is accessible for web crawlers and will help your site rank on Google's listings. Um, this is also really great for dynamic content. I mentioned that a bit earlier. Um, So if you wanted to show, again, in an e-commerce example, it might be that you want to show custom products, like based on the user's journey. If this user is searching for belts, you want to suggest them more belts to see based off of their browsing history. That might be an example where server-side rendering is really helpful. And you can see when you start to combine these, you have some pages that are static rendered because they're not changed very often. Some pages are better to be server-side rendered, and a framework that allows you to selectively pick between is really, really helpful as you're building your e-commerce store. And lastly, we'll talk about incremental static regeneration. So previously we talked about static regeneration or static rendering, and part of the downsides of that is that you had to rebuild your entire site whenever you wanted to change out the static content. And we then talked about server-side rendering, and some of the trade-offs between static and server is that server can take a little bit longer to build the page before it has to show the user. But you might have pages that update frequently, but predictably. And this might be an example of product listing page where every hour you want to update it instead of just on every request. So it's sort of meeting in the middle there. And this is something that Next.js gives you the opportunity to do. So you can optionally revalidate these static pages either by tags. So let's say you wanted to re-render all of your product pages, you could build them statically and then tag them as product pages and then just refresh all your product pages. Or if you wanted something to update once a day, let's say your blog page is statically rendered, but you want to update that once a day, you might set a timer for every 24 hours that static page will rebuild itself. And then just that page will rebuild instead of you having to rebuild your entire website. This can be a little bit tricky to manage if you're self-hosting, but platforms like Vercel give you all the infrastructure you need out of the box to be able to take advantage of all of these different rendering strategies at scale for your business. Hopefully, this has been a good overview of the different types of rendering strategies you might take advantage of within Next.js and why they're important for your search engine optimization, creating a dynamic website, and a performant website. As Thomas mentioned earlier, for every 100 milliseconds of added page speed, your sales decrease by potentially up to 1%. So lastly, we have a new paradigm. Earlier, I mentioned that older versions of Next.js separate these types of rendering strategies on a page-by-page basis. But in the example even Thomas shared earlier with the camera and the different rendering strategies, it's very possible, let's say your product page, you know that most of the content should be static. It's not going to change between days or weeks, but some of the content is dynamic, where let's say this suggested products carousel will be different based on every single user. So we have a new sort of way of thinking about rendering is called partial pre-rendering, where instead of by a page level, it's by a component level. So for these components, maybe it's the product description, the title, the pictures, these are going to be statically rendered. And then the other parts of the page are going to be dynamically rendered. And you can think of it as like you get the best of both worlds, the ultra-fast delivery of static content from the edge, combined with the flexibility and power of dynamic rendering without adding a ton of overhead and complexity to your code base. So during the build process, Next.js is going to pre-render as much of the page as it can, just like a static site. So things like your layout, navigation, images, and other static elements are instantly available to your users when they request them. But when there is dynamic components, a personalized recommendation section, pricing, shopping cart, those get wrapped in React suspense boundaries, and they're not included in the initial HTML that gets cached via ISR, incremental static regeneration. That static shell gets delivered to the user immediately, and reducing the time to first byte makes the experience feel really snappy. Then in the same request, the dynamic components are streamed in. So another benefit there is that you're not having to send duplicate requests, or I guess a multiple number of requests to get the same amount of information because they're streamed in, which helps your backend load. So the user starts seeing that content instantly while the rest loads in progressively. And that approach just gives us the performance of static delivery and the flexibility of dynamic rendering without requiring developers to overhaul their applications. To put it bluntly, it's simpler, faster, and it's a more scalable way to build complex applications. So the best part is that it's not just a future vision. You can try it out today. And we already have customers that are using it in production. These are in the Canary versions of Next 14 and Next 15. It's a powerful step forward, bringing together the best of static and dynamic rendering, a seamless experience. So with all that being said, I want to show you guys finally what we're going to be building today in our workshop. So I'm just going to pop over to my next tab here. And this is a store that is a headless Shopify store. So all of these products and prices are coming in from Shopify, but this is a Next.js storefront, which means it has been totally customized. And if you were to deploy this template, you can customize it yourself. You could change the colors, change the layout, etc. So we have here a bunch of snowboards. We have a search. So if I wanted to search for, let's say, t-shirts. Oh, maybe we don't have any t-shirts. Maybe I'll search for snowboards. Not getting something there. All right, we'll just jump into clothing. And here we have our different clothing. If I jump into snowboards, we have a bunch of different examples of snowboards. All right, so in clothing, a couple options, beanies, jeans. In our t-shirts, wanted to quickly highlight the ability to have different colors, different sizes, and this connects again to our Shopify API. So we can add this to our cart. We can see how this would connect up to Shopify and we could proceed through a checkout. All right, so in order to get this functioning, there's really like two main parts that have to be done. First, we have to create and set up a Shopify store. And second, we have to deploy the Next.js Commerce template and then hook that template up to the Shopify store that we've created. So in another tab here, I've already gone in and created a Shopify store. And once you create your own Shopify account, it's free to get started. This is what your home page is going to look like. You can see it takes you through a setup guide of everything you need to do to get your Shopify store set up. Now, when I was creating my store, I opted to have some products added by default. So this is default products that are added by Shopify, and these are our snowboards and apparel here. So once we have our Shopify store set up, how do we go about connecting it to like this Next.js template that we're going to deploy? That might be a bit confusing. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a headless app or a headless plugin to our Shopify store. And I'm going to do that by going to the search bar and just searching for headless with two S's. And you can see it's the first option here. So if I click on that, I already have it installed, but this is what it would look like. If you don't have a storefront already set up, you would just click add storefront. And mine is called super secret test headless. So when we go to deploy the Next.js template, we're going to need a couple of what they're called environment variables. And these are sort of like keys that can connect our Next.js application to this Shopify store. And those are going to be available in this headless storefront. So if I click on that, you can see that there's two APIs that I have access to. The first is the storefront API, which is going to give us data such as products, collections, and meta fields, which is for metadata, which helps for our search engine optimization. And the second is the customer account API. So this is the second one will give you access to customer details, orders, and markets. This is probably a lot more helpful for building internal apps to manage your business, but we need the storefront API. So I'm just going to click on manage. Now, this is going to pull up our credentials, being our public access token and our private access token. You're going to need both of these in addition to the name of your store in order to set up the Next.js Commerce template. In my next tab, I've already jumped one step ahead here. I have the Next.js Commerce template. So this is a starter kit for high performance commerce with Shopify. I'm just going to click the deploy button in order to get this started and deployed on Vercel. So I'm just going to click. I need to add some variables here so that I don't have duplicate private repository names. I'm going to click create. And what this is going to do is spin up a repository in my GitHub account and then attach it to my Vercel account. So it's going to clone all of the code that's needed to spin up this Next.js commerce template into my private GitHub account. It's going to connect it to Vercel, and then we're going to get this deployed on Vercel. And here is where we would post our Shopify access tokens, our Shopify store domain, some social media links, our site name. If you don't have any of these, you can just use like test, like that, and your store won't work, and you'll just have to go in and add these later, which you can do in the Vercel dashboard. Now, I've already got this deployed, so I'm not going to deploy again, but it's a pretty seamless process to just press deploy. So once this is deployed, now we have a deployed template that has our keys and we have our Shopify store, but they're not totally connected yet because they're hosted in different locations. So the last thing that we'll need to do is back in our Shopify store, we're going to go to our online store over here on the left, and it's going to open up the option to add a theme. So the last thing that you really need to do here, I'm just going to move this away from Zoom so I can click this button, is that you're going to have to add a new theme. So we have the option to upload a zip file or connect from a GitHub account. Now I can drop this in the Zoom chat, but you can also access it from the Next.js Commerce template that's hosted on Vercel. Now this is the Shopify headless theme that you need to install within Shopify in order to be able to use Next.js. So I'll go ahead and drop this link in the Zoom chat. And in order to download this, you would just press this code button and then download the zip, which is what I did. And then I added it, upload a zip file here into my theme library. So once the theme is uploaded, there's one last thing you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and click Customize. And then here on the theme settings on the left-hand side, I have the options to see all the theme settings. And in our storefront, you can see that we have a host name here on the left. So after I deployed my Next.js site on Vercel, it should take you to the deployment overview. And in that deployment overview, you have a list of domains where this template is deployed. So what I did is I just grabbed this domain and I pasted it here into Shopify. And after that is connected, you should just press save. It's grayed out for me because I haven't made any changes. And your Shopify store should be connected. And you should be able to start seeing products in your Shopify store. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Thomas to walk us through a bit of the code and talk about some of the gotchas that you need to um, be careful of as you're getting this set up.
All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. We'll talk about the code a little bit, get you guys familiar with the structure, some of the functionality that's already kind of baked into it. So hopefully you guys can see my screen here, but what I'm going to do is quickly walk you guys through the file structure, some of the cool parts in the template that you can keep note of, as well as some of the functionality like ISR and PPR and how we're caching this natively within the app to give you guys some performance benefits from Next.js straight out the gate with this template. So for those of you that I guess haven't seen Next.js or kind of the folder structure here, it's pretty much the majority of your app is going to live within this app folder, and Next.js uses something called app-based router or app router, which is essentially a file-based router that allows you to define dynamic pages. So this like bracket here page is essentially a variable. It could be anything that isn't defined here, right? So we have app. This would be /API/product/search. So this bracket could be any of your Shopify pages that you've defined, right? Like about us /contact /information, right? Any of those pages within Shopify will automatically carry over. We also have the base page here. You can think of it like an entry point is going to be this layout and this page.tsx within the root of this app. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. But we also have this components directory, right? So this is where you'll see a lot of reusable components for the cart, the grid, the icons, the layout, the products, right? So we've done this, we built this really well to the point where you guys can essentially start using these components and start mixing and matching. Better yet, right? Ask Cursor or some AI tool that you guys are using today to essentially start taking advantage of some of the components here and making this commerce site more of your own. We also have one good thing to note here is the lib folder. So this lib folder here is going to have all of the kind of Shopify specific calls, right? So we have some constants for the site. So you'll see like some of the sorting, right? We have trending, latest arrivals, some of the tags, some constants for the app that are not in our environment variables. And then in the Shopify folder, this is where we have pretty much all of the functions that are called to the Shopify GraphQL API to go ahead and get things like the collection, the menus, the pages, right? All the nitty-gritty pipelining stuff is already baked in here. So you can essentially call these functions server side or use a server action to call them within your client side and start to mix and match what these pages should fetch. One cool thing to also mention here is that we'll use get collections as an example. You'll see that it's using this thing called use cache, and it's just in string, so you might be a little bit confused if you're not familiar to the Next.js primitives. But there's essentially a couple primitives within Next.js like use cache, use server, use clients, and these are essentially navigating Next.js and the infrastructure it's running on to say, should you cache the function response here? Should you cache the output of this page? Should you run this on the server? Should you run this on the client, right? It gives you some of these options for the actual infrastructure right within the code. So this is what we mean by framework-defined infrastructure. You'll notice we have cache tag and cache life. These are imported from unstable cache here, which next cache, which you guys can use. And if we take a look again, you'll see that this cache tag is just tags.collections, which actually is in our constants. It's just this collections string, a string of the word collections. And what we're saying is the cache life should be days, right? So this is a form of ISR. We're essentially caching the data within this function response, and we're saying revalidate it every day, right? So the first time you make this call, you call this function get collections within the day, it's actually going to go ahead and process and call the Shopify GraphQL API to get the response. But from that point on, it's going to go ahead and cache it within Vercel's edge network. So from that point on, it's essentially just going to be giving you a cache hit. Of course, you can manually revalidate or invalidate this cache. But by default, right, you have the minutes, days, or weeks to go ahead and use as kind of a cache lifecycle. Awesome. So that's one quick example of some of the kind of out of the box examples, and you can kind of use what we're using here with use cache to take this to a different part of your application. Maybe you're calling an API that's not Shopify, right? Maybe you have a CMS that you're calling from as well. Great use case to essentially just copy and paste what we're doing here with the Shopify GraphQL API to the rest of your app. So let's go ahead and walk through a little bit of the actual code here. What you're seeing here, this home page, it's going to be within this page.tsx within the app folder. You'll see we're importing the carousel, the 3-item grid, and the footer. So this is the 3-item grid, this is the carousel, and this is the footer. And we've essentially just rendered those 3 components, right? You'll also notice within these page.tsx files, we have metadata that we've defined. And this is exactly how you would define static or dynamic metadata, right? So maybe this was a server component and it called a dynamic page, a dynamic product page, like something like this, right? You'll see that we're calling generate metadata, which is actually getting the product details from Shopify, and it is getting all the SEO metadata and essentially creating a dynamic form of that metadata so that when that product gets requested, it's actually calling Shopify. It's not cached, getting that response, and then shaping the header of the HTML response, right? So it's that easy. You essentially just have to call this function generate metadata, which is a function that is like has a designated namespace within Next.js. It looks for this function to generate metadata. Awesome. So let's go ahead and actually jump back to this homepage here. If we take a look at this 3-item grid, you'll see that what's happening here is we're getting collection products. So this is another function that's within the Shopify folder that you saw before. Essentially, it's looking for this collection. You can name this really any one of your collections you want, right? You can kind of customize this, but it's saying we need to have 3 items within this collection at least. And then we're going to go ahead and organize them in this manner, right? Full, half, half, which is what we'll see if we kind of zoom out here. Awesome. And if we go a step deeper, you'll start to see some of the navigation, right? We're using Next.js link component for navigation. And then we have this global grid tile image that we're using for the label, the pricing, right? As well as what size this image should be rendered. So that's actually another really, really neat thing that Next.js is going to do out of the box for you is it's going to go ahead and kind of optimize your images so that if it's on a mobile device, it's not rendering a full 1080p image because most of the time your users are not going to be able to notice that difference. So we're only going to render or intelligently render the right size for the right viewport. Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump to this PLP page where we have all of our products and snowboards, right? Where do you find that? Well, if we go to the product page, and we just see the first page, this is going to be that specific product page. But if we go to the search, we'll find a search page. And this is where we have those grid items. This is where we have the search logic, which is defined up top, right? And then within this product grid items, we also have that grid tile image. So again, we're reusing the same components. It's honestly probably like a handful of components that we're reusing over and over again. So it's really easy to kind of understand the general flow of these components, so you guys can start to mix and match this yourselves. But once we get to one of these specific product pages, product top here, you guys will start to see we're using a provider here to understand some of the cart logic as well. And we have a gallery of images. So if you have more than one image, you'll actually start to see something similar to these shirts here, where you have different image options, and you can kind of use this image gallery carousel to go through the different variants. And it'll also have the product description down below, which includes the description here, as well as the selection of different variants. Down below, we have related products, which is going to be this portion right here. And yeah, that's pretty much kind of the basic structure of it. One thing to also quickly mention that is pretty neat is how this app is using PPR, right? So if we actually go to collection, actually, let me just go ahead and search suspense. So this is our collections list, which you guys can see. Let's go ahead and jump back to this page right here. So this navigation here is actually a collections list. What's going to happen is you're seeing this native React component suspense. It's essentially saying, go ahead and show this fallback, which is pretty much a skeleton, until this collections list fully renders, right? And the cool thing about this is that this collections list is actually a server component. So if we dive into this, you'll see that it's calling get collections, which again is calling that Shopify API, which is cached. But if we actually remove this cache, you'll start to see that this will call the API every single time. There will be some load involved, and this will actually, on the first request, show you a skeleton, and then kind of stream in the collections as they are available. So that's one cool example to start to kind of take advantage of PPR. PPR is enabled in the starter template for you guys to take a look at and also try out. So I'd highly recommend taking advantage of that when you have some more dynamic components in your application here. Perfect. So one cool thing I wanted to kind of show you guys is how we can start to take the starter and advance upon it, right? The cool thing about the starter is that we've seen a lot of companies actually take the concepts of the starter, take the components, take the baseline of this foundational project, and evolve it into much, much more, right? You have a lot of the same functionality that you might need within, bare minimum e-commerce sites, but we can definitely make this a little bit fancier, a little bit better, right? I'll give you guys a quick example. One cool thing that I've been doing is messing around with view transitions. I absolutely love view transitions. It's just a shame it doesn't work on Firefox. But what I've been doing is essentially I made a branch here that has view transitions enabled, right? And this is something I did probably within a couple minutes, just asking cursor to go ahead and incorporate the view transitions. Next also has a view transitions library. So if you guys want to take part in that, you can also kind of add it pretty easily within your application. And the cool thing about view transitions here, if you guys haven't seen this before, is it essentially animates the images here, right? So it uses the IDs of the images to kind of swap out the orders. And this is actually really nice once we get to something like a PLP page, right? So once you're on the snowboards here and you can essentially click into this and it will expand into the view. It's really nice. It's something like the new, Kanye shop. If you guys have seen that one, a lot of new e-commerce stores are using view transitions, and Next.js makes it really easy to kind of add that into the piece here. Awesome. So let's go ahead and actually jump back to the slides. If you guys have any questions, we can definitely jump into those in just a bit. But we want to make sure that you guys aren't getting tripped up with any of the setup so far. So here are some, gotchas, things to note as you guys are trying this out. One cool thing to mention is that you do need at least 3 products, and you do need these 2 required collections, right? So as you guys have seen within the code, there is certain collections that are named that the starter template is looking for, like the homepage carousel and the homepage featured items that you guys are seeing here. If you guys don't have those collections and you don't have at least 3 products within at least the featured items, you're not going to see anything on the homepage. And that might trip you up at first. You might be wondering, is Shopify connected or not? You can always go to the /search route just to confirm. But a good tip here is to make sure that you have these collections added. Another thing is to add menus. So I'm sure you guys have menus in Shopify and you're using them, but make sure they are named Next.js front-end header menu for that the header menu in Next.js. You could always just add this into Shopify or change this in your Next.js project. The choice is yours, but I wanted to point that out. And with that being said, let's go ahead and quickly recap what we've talked about, what we've done so far with this demo. So of course, we've installed the headless app on Shopify. Christian walked us through how to grab the Shopify access token and install the headless app. We also installed the headless theme, which is required on Shopify. And then we deployed that Shopify e-commerce template on Vercel, and we just did a quick code walkthrough. So what is next, right? Where do you guys take this? Well, there's a couple options here that we've seen a lot of teams kind of utilize within the Next ecosystem. Excuse me. The first of which is experimentation. So if you guys have a Next.js application today and you guys are in the e-commerce space, definitely check out what you can do with middleware and our Flags SDK. We have a lot of customers who are using middleware for kind of like A/B testing, right? Maybe like 50% of users go to this page versus this other page, new page, right? It's a great way to essentially have that intermittent routing before the users get to your page.tsx. And then we also have the Flags SDK, which is really robust. A lot of teams actually use this for incremental rollouts instead of just like pushing everything to production at once. They'll essentially do a flag-based iteration. Internationalization is also something that Next.js supports out of the box. We have a really, really good framework or structure of adding internationalization. Next.js can essentially identify out of the box what kind of language preference the browser that is requesting has. So with that, we can start to change the language of the content accordingly. You can add more personalized and dynamic experiences, as we've seen so far. You can use Vercel to host and monitor. And you can also use V0, which is our AI tool to generate web UI. We've seen a lot of people actually create PDP and POP pages within V0. So if you haven't tried that out yet, definitely check it out. All right. Christian, you taking this one or not?
Sure, I can.
Yeah.
So this is just a sort of an overview of like how this Next.js project is going to connect to our Shopify backend. We've talked about why Next.js is the right framework to scale your e-commerce business, but let's take a look at how Vercel will complement it with powerful infrastructure. Next.js and Vercel together form a highly effective combination. Vercel provides a seamless platform experience with features like managed deployments, built-in CI/CD, a global edge network, and even security feature like firewalls, our web application firewall. This means your team never has to worry about infrastructure scaling. They don't have to worry as much about DevOps. We handle all of that for you. And as an e-commerce business, that's one less thing that you need to manage internally. You can focus on selling your core product and not whether or not your site is able to handle all that traffic that you're going to get when you start running ads. The diagram here illustrates the difference of responsibility between traditional Shopify architecture and a modern Next.js and Vercel stack. In the Shopify model, Hydrogen is your front-end framework, Oxygen is the hosting platform, and you're fully tied into Shopify's backend. With Next.js and Vercel, you're not locked into a single ecosystem. You gain the flexibility to scale and adapt as your needs evolve. For example, you might want to move away from Shopify entirely at some point, or use it solely as a backend CMS alongside tools like Payload or other headless solutions. Next.js is going to give you the freedom to integrate with whatever technologies make sense for your business now and in the future. And I'll just add that you also have the ability to build a more customized, dynamic experience for your visitors. When you use something like Next.js, you have full control over the code and can build whatever experience you want as your e-commerce store. And you're not locked in to sort of a more templatized experience that you might get through a standard Shopify experience. So with Vercel, we have the developer experience platform. Because current collaboration is a bottleneck, we give you the tools to, we give your developers the tools, I should say, that they need in order to be more productive. This frees your developers to focus on front-end innovation by deploying your app seamlessly with zero config and CI/CD. The toolbar gives non-technical stakeholders or technical stakeholders the ability to comment directly on live previews of your application as you're building it. And this sort of centralizes all of the conversation around your app as it's getting built. Your uh, marketing manager or designer, they can comment exactly on the live preview of exactly what they want changed. They no longer have to take a screenshot and then draw an arrow and say like this button over here needs to change color and then attach it to a Jira ticket and then notify you on Slack that, hey, I updated the Jira ticket and I left a comment for you to review. It's just centralized in one smooth place. So Vercel just gives you the ability to share work that's already in production, test those changes without having to leave that deployment. You can iterate quickly by sharing these with your stakeholders and comment directly on the UI, like I mentioned before. And lastly, we provide the infrastructure to help you get from preview to production as quickly and as safely as possible. When builds are fast and rollbacks are instant and easy, every developer can ship small iterative changes that keep the team moving forward. And you don't have to worry about your deployments breaking production or anything like that. You can ship confidently.
Awesome. Perfect. Sorry for moving around there, but
All good.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about the managed infrastructure as well, right? Vercel offers the DX platform, which Christian just mentioned, but also has managed infrastructure. So as you guys have seen, right, we power thousands of e-commerce businesses with managed infrastructure built to perform and scale. So we'll take care of the scaling. We'll take care of the CI/CD. We'll give you analytics out of the box. And you guys can focus on what's important, which is building really, really immersive and engaging e-commerce experiences, right? We want to make sure that you're not worrying about, will my site go down? Will traffic be a burden for me? We want to make sure that scaling is our job and your jobs are just focused on the actual code and experience. Awesome. So quick poll, would you guys be interested in seeing a personalized demo of Vercel? This couple seconds, I guess. Perfect. So yeah, we can leave some time here now for any questions that you guys might have. Here's some resources. So if you guys want to, jump to some of the links that we've seen or shared throughout this presentation, we have that template ready, as well as the Shopify integration document, which goes into great detail of all the steps needed. We have some customer use cases, as well as, why go headless, right? With Shopify and Vercel. It's a common practice and pattern that we've seen, not even in e-commerce alone, to go headless. There's a lot of benefits to do that with Next.js. Awesome. So you guys have any questions? I see one question from Nathaniel Deal, Mr. Deal. He's asking about the updates on V2. Are you referring to the V2 of the Shopify template, the e-commerce template? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that is actually something that we are working on. Not too sure on the timeline. Last I heard about it, it was something that was still being tinkered with. But that is something that the Vercel team, Next.js team, are actively cooking up. So as soon as that comes out, we'll definitely let you guys know. No problem. Any other questions, guys, about Next.js, the template, Vercel as a whole? If not, that's cool too. You guys can always find us, add us on LinkedIn, shoot us a message if you guys ever have any questions, or end up trying this template and have any trouble. Feel free to let us know. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, guys. We really appreciate the time, and hopefully this was helpful.